Want to take your microphone from sounding like this to sounding a little bit more like this? Let's get into it. All right, let's cut to the chase. Why should you watch this video? There are thousands of tutorials out there that claim to have that quick fix for your audio. This audio filter changes everything, or audio pros hate him for sharing this one magic trick. Well, as an actual fucking wizard who has coincidentally worked in pro audio for over a decade, I'm here to tell you that there's not a fucking spell for that. Audio is something that's commonly misunderstood. And that's understandable because it's a niche topic that you don't really stumble across in everyday life. I'm not going to waste your time. If you're looking for a quick fix, this video is not for you. There are too many variables in audio for there to be a one-size-fits-all solution to improving the sound of your microphone. If better audio is really what you want, you need to put in a little bit of work to understand your specific situation. And I'm sorry if that sounds boring, but it's the honest truth. But that's why I'm making this video precisely for you, to help you understand what situation you're in and how to make the best of what you've already got. You probably already have all of the tools that you need. You don't need to buy a new microphone or more software. I'll do my best to explain all of the keys to better sound in terms that are easy to understand, even if you don't have a background in this kind of thing. Let's get your mic set up right so that you can focus on your content, confident that it will sound good. One of the first things you're going to want to do before you do anything else is to check the quality settings of your microphone, as well as the format that it is recording in. Ideally, we want our formats for our audio devices to be the same all the way throughout Windows, OBS, etc. This means that there will be less chance of distortions and glitches happening in the audio as your PC tries to change between these different formats on the fly. To check this on the Windows side of things, we want to get to the sound control panel. To do that, we can right-click on the little speaker icon in the bottom right, or type in sound settings into your start menu. And that brings us this window here. We can't change the things that we want here quite as easily, so we want to go to the sound control panel. For me, it's the top right, it might be down the bottom. You should then get this window popping up, and we want to go to the recording tab. Since we're changing our microphone, we want to make sure that we are here on recording, and then you can right-click on the device that you are using as your microphone, and then hit Properties. If we go to the Advanced tab here, we will have this default format drop-down menu, and here we can select from a bunch of different options. My microphone does not want me to change that while I'm currently recording with it, so it's currently grayed out, but if you click on it, you will see a bunch of options here. You want to go for at least 44,100 Hertz. I personally prefer to keep mine in 48,000 Hertz because that's the same as programs like VoiceMod. And you want to go for at least 16-bit, possibly 24-bit, if it's available. If you're having any doubts because you don't know what this means, just go with 16-bit. If for some reason you're having problems with your microphone coming through one ear and not the other, then you can also change this to one channel from two channel. It doesn't really make a huge difference unless you're having an issue with it. The only situations in which you would actually want to keep this on two channel here in the settings is if you're using something like an ASMR mic or something that has stereo in it. Once you've done that, we're going to go to our playback settings. Now, whatever output devices you have, I recommend setting them all to the same value unless there's a very specific reason why you would not want to do that. But especially your primary playback device, you want to make sure that that's also operating at the same default format. So we're going to do the same thing on the playback tab, right-click, Properties, then we go to Advanced, and we can see here, we have a bunch of options once again. We want these numbers to be the same as our microphone to avoid any glitches and mishaps further down the line. Hit OK. And once again, if you have other devices that you are using, make sure to do the same on those as well. Okay, that's it for the Windows side of things. The next thing you want to do is inside your OBS, go to the settings, go to audio, and you want to make sure, once again, that the sample rate is correct. For me, I've been using 48 kilohertz, So that's what I need to make sure is also listed here as well. Another thing that I recommend doing is going from the audio tab to the output tab. If you're not already using advanced mode for your output, whether you're on Streamlabs OBS or OBS Studio, I highly recommend switching to advanced from simple. This gives you a couple of more options for video qualities and different kinds of encoders and blah, 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 blah. What we want to do is go to our audio tab and we want to change this bitrate to 320. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but basically this is the highest quality available for the audio going out to most streaming websites. Make sure to hit apply and you're done with that boring shit for now. Now we need to get into the details of the kind of microphone that you have and what that means as we move through the rest of this tutorial. There are two main types of microphone. There's a third, but it's highly unlikely that you are using that. So we're going to be going over condenser and dynamic microphones. First of all, what's the difference? Well, a condenser is a lot more sensitive, tends to have a little bit more detail in certain ranges of the sounds that you are recording. But because of this sensitivity, there's also a higher chance of you picking up background noise and also the microphone distorting when there's a huge variance in the loudness of what you're recording. Dynamic microphones, on the other hand, tend to be a bit more focused. They are more durable and less susceptible to issues with background noise, and also are less likely to distort when things get louder. The type of microphone that you have will inform lots of different things as we go through, such as the proximity or the distance of the microphone from your mouth, the orientation of that microphone, as well as things like the input level that we should be looking at with the mic and the output level that we should be aiming for within our softwares. It will also have a pretty profound effect on how much of the environment around you the microphone picks up too. Once you know what kind of microphone you have, if you didn't know already, there is one thing that you need to make absolutely sure that you know about it, and that is the polar pattern. The primary purpose of a microphone's polar pattern is to determine the direction in which the microphone picks up sound from its main body. Typically, it will be either of three main patterns: cardioid, bidirectional, and omnidirectional. Some microphones will have the option to switch between these different modes. I won't go into all of the details, but here's the fundamentals that you need to know. A cardioid pattern picks up sound primarily from the direction it's facing and rejects sound behind it. A bidirectional pattern picks up sound from the front and back, but rejects sound from the left and right of it. And finally, omnidirectional essentially picks up sound in a sphere around it in every direction. Unless there is a very specific reason why you would want to use a different pattern, you're going to want to go with cardioid for live streaming if you are the primary source of sound that the microphone is supposed to be picking up. Because we want the microphone to pick us up and as little as possible of everything else around us, such as a keyboard, mouse, or something happening in the room beyond your screen. This brings us to mic positioning. Correct microphone positioning is probably the single most important factor in how good your microphone sounds. Even if you have the correct polar pattern, if selecting it is even an option for you, if your microphone is not positioned correctly, then it doesn't matter what else you do. It won't sound good. If your microphone is set to the cardioid polar pattern, but then it is pointing at your chest or is pointing down towards your keyboard and mouse, then it's going to pick up the wrong things. So the first thing that you need to consider with positioning is the orientation of the microphone. That's basically just the direction that the microphone is facing. It may sound super obvious that the microphone needs to be pointing towards your mouth for it to get the best sound, but you'd be surprised how many people don't actually know what the front of their microphone is. It can be a little bit deceptive in some of the designs. If you're using a condenser microphone, they tend to look like they may pick up sound from all different directions. That's probably because they may be partially designed to do that. However, in the vast majority of cases, if the microphone is set to a cardioid mode, then the front of the microphone is the part of the microphone with the logo on it. So you would want that part of the microphone facing towards your mouth. With most dynamic microphones, it's a bit more straightforward. Assuming the dynamic microphone is also a cardioid microphone, then you simply need to point it towards your mouth from the top. On the subject of proximity, or the distance of the microphone from your mouth, the main thing to consider is the type of microphone that you have. Condenser microphones tend to handle things a little bit better if they are a little bit further away from your mouth than something like a dynamic microphone, which is designed to be held up close to the source that it is recording. The closer a microphone gets to a source of sound, the more low frequencies it will get, the more bass it will get coming through. Also, the more detail of that sound the microphone will record. Remember before when I said that condenser microphones tend to pick up a little bit more detail in certain frequency ranges? Well, this is where this becomes really, really important. The closer a condenser microphone gets to your mouth, the more sounds of your mouth it's going to pick up. Not just your voice, but lip smack and other undesirable noises that come from the human body. This is obviously still present in dynamic microphones as well, but it's not quite as obvious, as dynamic microphones tend to be less sensitive in those areas. Generally speaking, you want the microphone to be closer to you than it is to anything else around you, as you are the primary source of sound that you want it to pick up. But if you get too close, then you start picking up the sounds coming out of your mouth or from other parts of your body that you don't really want to come through. So here are some guidelines, if you will. For condenser microphones, I recommend somewhere between 6 and 8 inches between you and the microphone. And for dynamic microphones, I recommend anywhere between 3 and 6. Now, if you don't have a microphone arm already, that may be a little bit difficult to achieve. If you're using something like a desk stand, there are lots of issues that come with that. But if you really don't want to change that setup, then you're just going to have to get as close to these values as you possibly can. Regardless, here are a couple of suggestions for ways that you can position and orient your microphone to get the best results with what you have. Though, please, if you're going to invest any money, please get a microphone arm. There are a couple of reasons for why these positions are so good for your microphone, but there's only one that you really need to understand on a personal level. Yes, the microphone is pointed at you, the main source of sound, but it's also positioned in a way that noisy things that you will be using at your computer are also behind the microphone. This will give you the best results because if you look at the diagram, this is where they pick up the least amount of sound. Positioning your mic between you and those undesirable sources means that you are optimizing that pattern of sound that's being picked up. This means that all of the plugins or filters that you may choose to use later on to enhance the sound will have to do a lot less heavy lifting. For the people out there who might be wondering, well, what about pop filters? Well, if I'm being completely brutally honest, if you're live streaming, the downsides of using a pop filter are probably going to be higher than the positives. A pop filter is designed to stop plosives, or bursts of air leaving your mouth, from hitting the microphone directly, giving you that nasty, booming, muffled sound. If you're using the microphone positions that I just showed you, it shouldn't be a huge issue. Mostly because that plosive energy, that sound burst, that air burst coming out of your mouth should pass by the microphone without impacting it directly. But if you are having this issue, I recommend picking up something called a windshield as opposed to a pop filter. It takes up way less of your peripheral vision and does the job well enough to avoid any major issues. When you're streaming, playing games, looking at a different monitor to read chat or check OBS, you don't want this big circle obscuring your vision. There are some downsized versions, more portable versions that can work. It's really just a judgment call. My advice is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Okay, let's talk about input and output levels. Put simply, the input level is the strength of the signal that your microphone is picking up and sending to your computer. The output level is the strength of the signal being sent out to your stream, to the people viewing your stream. It's important to differentiate these two things because this is how we avoid issues like distortion or clipping. On the input stage, we want our microphone to have a strong, healthy signal that doesn't go too far up the level meter where we're worried that it's going to go into the red and give you that nasty electronic crunch sound. But we also want to make sure that the level is not so low that when we bring up the volume at the output stage, we don't get lots of nasty background noise and electric static and stuff like that. It's a very fine balance, but it is absolutely vital that you find it. If you are using a condenser microphone, you'll want to play slightly on the safer side here, again, because it just is more sensitive. So how do we go about adjusting our input gain? If you're using a USB microphone, there are two ways that you would go about this. If your microphone has a gain dial on the microphone itself, then you can do it there. But please make sure that that dial actually controls the microphone gain or input and not just your headphone level or something like that. If it doesn't have one of these gain dials, then you're going to want to set it within Windows itself. Let me show you how to do that. I recommend leaving your streaming software open so that you can see that meter going up and down as you adjust the levels. To get to the settings, you're going to want to go again to the speaker in the bottom right, go to sound settings, once again go to the control panel. That brings us back to here. So go to the recording tab and then right click on your microphone device and then go to the levels tab. Now we have a slider from 0 to 100. This is going to control how loud our microphone is. So when we slide this up and down, you can see within my OBS software that the microphone level is getting quieter and quieter. You can see as I was moving that slider up and down that the volume was getting quieter and quieter. If you are using an XLR mic setup, then you will use the gain dial on the hardware interface that you are using to record your mic to adjust this level there. Don't do it from this control panel. Regardless of what kind of microphone setup you have, you're going to want to set your input level so that the loudest parts of when you are talking is somewhere between -25 and -15. If you don't have those numbers visually available like I do here in your streaming software, then you want to look at the colors of the meter itself. -20 is where the green stops and the yellow or orange begins. The reason why we're having our input level set around this area is because we want to give ourselves a little bit of extra space above it for when things get a little bit more excited. When that audio level peaks up into the red, possibly even maxing out the meter, that's when you start getting that distortion. We don't want that. If you are at all concerned about your microphone peaking and distorting, then you can be conservative with this. You can bring your input level down a little bit more. It's especially important if you tend to have a lot of variance in your voice and its loudness when you're streaming. You may be thinking to yourself, well, that means that my microphone is going to be super quiet, right? How will people hear me over everything else going on my stream? Well, in the next stage of this tutorial, we're going to go over the different filters or plugins that we're going to use in order to smooth out our voice, clean it up a little bit, and also raise that volume up so that we get a nice loud signal going out to the stream without running the risk of it distorting. That's the output stage. That's the output level. So with that, let's jump into the filters or plugins that we're going to use on our microphone input to get that nice, thick broadcaster sound. For this part, I am going to turn off everything that I currently have active on my microphone, and you should already hear that there's going to be a pretty drastic difference in the way that it sounds. Okay, so this is what I sound like without any processing on my voice whatsoever. The first thing that we need to do is we're going to go and get some free filter plugins for our microphone that are a really nice alternative to the ones that come with your streaming software. I personally really dislike the ones that come with your streaming software because they don't give you any visual information to help you understand what is actually happening to your sound. We are going to pick up this set of plugins from Reaper, which is a professional audio production suite. They have this fantastic bundle here called Replugs. So if you go to reaper.fm and then go to Replugs, you'll be able to download this stuff for free. Depending on whether or not you're using a 32-bit or 64-bit system, grab the right installer for you. Once you've got that file downloaded, go ahead and install it, and then you will need to restart your streaming software for it to pick those plugins up. To get these plugins added to our signal, we then need to go to the filters option for our microphone source, and we're going to right-click, add, and instead of picking one from the list here, we're going to go for VST 2.x plugin. I'm going to call this first one Noise Reduction. If you don't really have a problem with static or any kind of fan noise in the background, you can skip this step as it does take a small hit to the overall quality of your sound. You can also use something like NVIDIA Broadcast here if you want to use that instead. But not everybody has an RTX card, so this is a good free alternative. Once you've done that, if you click on this drop-down menu, you should get a bunch of stuff here. I work in pro audio, so I've got a whole bunch of different things that you don't need to worry about. But you should see a bunch of them listed as REA and then something else. The first thing we want to do is grab the FIR or FIR plugin. So grab that and then click the Open Plugin Interface. Now, you can already see, as I'm talking, this is the spectral analysis of my voice. But when I'm not speaking, you can see that there's still noise coming through. That's what this plugin is for. It's to get rid of that background sound, whether that is your fan, air conditioner, or, just the sound of your computer being turned on. So there's a couple of things we need to do. We want to go to the Edit Mode drop-down menu and hit Precise. This is going to take out very specific frequencies from our signal. And then on Mode, change it to Subtract. Okay. Once you hit that, you'll get this new tick box here called Automatically Build Noise Profile. Enable during noise. So what we're going to do is we're going to be perfectly quiet for around 5 seconds with this tick box checked. And then once that time has passed, we're going to uncheck it once again. And it's going to build an analysis of our background noise here. Okay, great. So you may not hear it. I'll have to look at the recording, but you should now hear a difference in the fact that there is no longer any background static, or the background static has been dramatically reduced. That's all we need to do with this plugin, so we can close that down, and we're going to add our next one. The next plugin that we add is going to be a noise gate. But we're not going to use the one in OBS. We're going to use another one of these Reaper plugins. So go to VST 2.x again. I'm going to call this Noise Gate. Okay. Select the plugin. The one we want this time is Regate. Open up the interface, and we've got this one. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the basic controls here and what they do to give you a better understanding of how you need to calibrate this for your specific needs. Again, Every microphone is different, everyone's voice is different, so I can't give you specific settings that will work for you guaranteed. All I can do is provide some guidelines. What a noise gate does is it essentially acts like a barrier or a closed door with your microphone's signal. When the signal of the microphone, when the volume of the microphone is below a certain amount, it closes the door. When it goes above that amount, it opens the door. So the goal here is so that the door closes when anything quieter than us speaking happens, but it opens whenever we speak, therefore getting rid of the majority, if not all, of our background noise when we are not speaking. I'm going to go over the core controls here for this plugin that should get you the results that you want. The first control that we need to go over is called the threshold. It is the slider on the left side here. Essentially what this does is it sets the value at which the gate opens and closes. We want the gate to open when we talk and close when we are typing or clicking our mouse. So I'm going to be quiet for a second here and I'm going to see what level, if you look at the green bars, my typing and clicking is at. Okay, so it seems like it's about here. It's about -40. So now that I've set the value here above my typing and clicking, you should hear how you can still see the green bars moving up and down when I type, but you can't actually hear it coming through. And then when I talk, you can hear me perfectly fine. It might sound a little bit awkward though. We have to smooth out that transition a little bit more. The first thing we want to do is just bring down this attack value here to 1 ms, which is pretty much the lowest it will go. This means that the door will open as fast as it possibly can to let your voice through. Then we want to change the release a little bit higher. I personally recommend anywhere around 200 to 250. It'll mean that the gate stays open, the door stays open just for a little bit after you finish talking so that it doesn't cut off the ends of your words. If you do find that your words are getting cut off early, then you may want to look at the release time and increase it. I wouldn't recommend going anywhere over 400 here. Okay, the next filter that we're going to add is an EQ. So we're going to go to VST2 plugin again. We're going to call this EQ or equalizer. We're going to go to the menu and we are going to add re-EQ. I feel like this is probably one of the more intimidating looking ones, but to put it relatively simply, the EQ changes the overall sound of your voice, how bassy and boomy it is, how bright and sparkly it is, or in the worst of cases, how kind of muddy and mushy it sounds. There are a couple of things that we're going to do here. We have a couple of tabs which control each of these different dots, and they all have different functions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the type of the first tab, the first dot. We're going to change that to something called a high pass. Now, what this essentially does is it cuts out all of the information that is grayed out here. All of the really bassy, boomy, low sounds coming through in your voice or the things around you will be removed from the sound of your microphone. So we're just going to lower this ever so slightly. I'm going to go with around 80 Hertz, and then we can leave it at that. For the second dot here, the second tab, we're going to do a band pass. So this is a more specific change to the sound of our voice in a very specific area. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to narrow this bandwidth down here, which makes the area that it's affecting smaller. And I'm going to listen to the sound of my voice. And I'm going to try and find something usually around the lower end here, which makes my voice sound especially muffled and muddy. If you don't have a way to hear your own voice through whatever hardware or microphone you're using, there is a way that you can do it within OBS. What you do is you go to the advanced audio options. It should be like a cog that will enter you into this menu. And then here under the mic aux input, you're going to change audio monitoring to monitor on. Then in our EQ, we're going to drag around this second dot here until we find the area where it makes our voice really muddy and unclear. So now that we've found the bit that sounds terrible, instead of going up and boosting that area, we're instead going to take it away. So we adjust the gain here, and I'm going to bring this down by about 2.5. Now, it may seem subtle at first what kind of difference this is making. Really depends on how finely tuned your ears are for this kind of thing. But when we start getting into things like compression, it's going to make a big difference to take this stuff out, clean up the sound a little bit before we start getting into making it louder. So instead of going on to the third node here, we're instead going to skip all the way to node number 4. And we're going to use something called a low pass. This is essentially the opposite of what we did on the first one. So we're going to turn that on. And we're going to put this frequency value here somewhere around 18,000. This is where the human hearing, generally speaking, ends. So this is all just kind of useless digital information that can interfere with the other filters that we're going to be adding later on. So we can get rid of that. It should have very little audible impact on the sound of your microphone. It just helps with things behind the scenes. Once we've got that in, we're going to go to node number 3. And here's where you can add a little bit to sweeten the sound of your voice. There may be a part of your voice that, adds a little bit of brightness, a little bit of sparkle. For me, I know it's around 4,200. Don't worry about being too specific. Just listen back to your voice once again using the audio monitor and look for something that kind of brightens up your voice a little bit more. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with 4,300. I'm going to narrow it a little bit again, and it just adds a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of air to the voice, makes it sound just a little bit more professional. We're done with the EQ now, so we can close that down. I can't stress enough how important it is to be conservative in how much you boost this. Unless you really know what you're doing, if you start adding too much in the EQ, then it can really mess with the way your microphone sounds. You don't want your voice to have a negative impact on people because it sounds too bright and too harsh. Just a little bit of boost to lift the sound of your voice, just a little bit, is usually more than enough, especially if you've positioned your mic correctly. The next filter that we're going to add is a compressor. So once again, add VST plugin. We're going to call this Compressor. And we're going to go to our menu and select Recomp, not Re-X-Comp, Recomp. Open that up, and we have some controls which are similarly named to the gate, but they do act slightly differently. We have the threshold again on the left. We have attack, release, but we also have a couple of other controls that we definitely want to look at. Let's start by explaining what a compressor actually does. The job of a compressor is to take an audio signal coming through it and then reduce the volume of anything that passes over a specific value. So while a gate opens and closes to let sound through, a compressor reduces the volume of a sound as it passes past a certain amount. The goal of this is to produce a sound that is a lot smoother so that there aren't huge dips and peaks when we're speaking. That can be quite distracting. It also helps to make the voice sound a lot fuller. The first control that we are going to look at is the ratio control. This essentially is the extremity of the volume reduction. As the volume passes over the threshold, which we'll set in a second, the higher the number on the ratio, the more it will reduce the volume as it passes over it. A good value here is about 4. So in this case, 4:1, the 1 being next to the colon here on the right-hand side. Now that we've set how much we want it to reduce the sound by, we can then adjust the threshold. This is generally going to be set around the point at which your voice starts to get loud. Again, the goal is to reduce the volume of the louder parts of your voice. You'll see that there is a meter here which currently isn't lit up. This will display how much our voice is being reduced. So if I keep talking now, you'll see we're starting to get some red bars here, and we get a little number telling us at the very top how many decibels or units of volume the sound is being reduced by. Generally speaking, I recommend going anywhere under 6. If you're going under -6, then I think the effect of it is going to sound way too extreme. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit here, maybe up to about, let's go with -23. And you can see as I talk, the louder parts of my voice are being reduced by a pretty significant amount. It should already be quite audible that my voice sounds a lot more even overall. I recommend being cautious when adjusting the threshold here, because if you overdo it and you end up with too much gain reduction on this meter on the right-hand side, then it can really squeeze the life out of your voice. The human voice does have natural rising and falling to its volume, and you don't want to completely remove that. You just want to make it more pleasant to listen to. Next, we're going to take a look at the attack. Again, not going to go into the deeper details here, but you can sort of think of this as how quickly the compressor reacts to a sound passing over the threshold. Because we're streaming and we're not doing like a studio recording, we can actually set this very quick. What that means is that it's going to react very quickly to any time that the sound gets too loud. With the release, what I personally recommend is somewhere between 100 and 150. There is a lot of debate about what is best here, but I think that as long as you don't go too high here, such as 300 plus, then your voice should sound perfectly fine. For me and the way that I talk, I like it around 120. If you have any doubts, you can also set this to the same number. It is not going to be a deal breaker. The last thing we want to do here is bring the volume of our voice up. Remember before when we were talking about the input versus output level? This is where we start to raise the output level. Right now, if you look at our meter within our broadcast software, I feel like we're actually a little bit quiet still. I like my volume to be closer to the -10 or just below the red. So what we do here is we adjust the wet volume here. This is called makeup gain. So I'm going to increase this by 4. Okay, now if I take a look here, we're getting a lot closer to that -10. I'm personally quite happy with this. I'm actually going to go maybe up to 5 here. The goal is to take it as close to that -10 or as close to the top of the orange and the bottom of the red on the meter as we possibly can without it staying in the red permanently. So this is pretty good. Now, because we are a little dangerously close to that red zone, the last thing that we're going to add is a limiter. And in this case, you can just use the default streaming software limiter that comes with OBS. So I'm just going to add that. And again, we have a threshold thing here. This acts as a brick wall. It's quite literally called a brick wall limiter. This means that no matter what, the audio signal cannot go louder than this amount. So, because I said I want to get it to as close to 10 as possible, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that to -10. You might be asking yourself, oh, well, why not go for a -3 or as close to the top as you possibly can? Well, simply put, every audio source that's running through your stream takes up space. And if everything is maxed out to its loudest possible value, then there is going to be no natural ebb and flow to the volume of your stream. Everything will just be blasting all the time at maximum volume. That, I can tell you, does not sound good. So I personally recommend, highly, highly recommend putting it to -10 as opposed to, -3, -5 or anything like that. You should already hear a drastic difference in the way that my voice sounds from before when we had no adjustments, no filters, to the way that it sounds now. But just to reinforce that point, let's take a quick listen, okay? So this is me speaking with all of these filters on. And this is me speaking with none of them on. It is pretty different, I think you'll agree. Not just in the volume, which is the most obvious thing that you'll notice, but also in the clarity of my voice. everything sounds a lot more controlled, a lot fuller, a lot more even, and sounds brighter and more broadcast appropriate, more podcasty. That's what we want to go for. Now, there are obviously more things that you can do to further enhance this sound. The better you understand these tools, the more you can tweak them and tailor them to your voice. To really drive this home, what I'm going to do to finish off this video is go through 3 different stages of loudness. And I'm going to compare what they sound like without the filters on and what they sound like with the filters on. So this is what it would sound like if I was quite softly spoken, speaking relatively quietly. And then if I go up to this volume, this is about what it would sound like if I was actually streaming. This is my general volume that I would speak when I am broadcasting live. And then this is when I'm talking very loudly. You know, maybe I'm at the point where I'm about to start yelling, and you can see that already there's a huge difference in the volume of my voice. And this is what it sounds like if I'm speaking fairly softly with all of the filters on, all of the processing is now happening. And then if I go up to my usual speaking streaming voice, this is about the volume that I would be speaking on stream, just as I'm going through my usual things that I do. And then if I start talking very loudly, this is me yelling at pretty much the same volume as I was in the previous one. Now, obviously there is still a slightly audible difference in the volume between those 3 performances, let's call them. But you can hear how much more controlled it sounds without distorting or becoming hard to listen to. And that's really the goal. When you're live, you don't really know what is going to happen. You don't necessarily know how you will react to anything that happens on your stream. That's why it's important to have processing on your voice that will really make sure that no matter what does happen, you still know that the audio will come across clearly and you won't have anybody reaching to pull off their headphones. And that's it. You're pretty much done. Some final notes on keeping your audio levels balanced throughout your stream. If it happens that people say that your microphone is too quiet, don't turn your microphone volume up. Turn everything else down. Turning the microphone volume up after this point will only result in all of those problems coming back. Things will start to distort, get crackly. Make sure that you adjust everything else down to match your new optimized voice level. This is, for the most part, a set and forget situation. Unless you happen to move your microphone to a different position or move your entire setup somewhere else, you shouldn't have to adjust these settings again. And that means it's time to wrap things up. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that this video was useful to you and that you can look forward to a future of streaming where you're not stressing about your equipment or microphone quality not being quote unquote good enough. And maybe I saved you a little bit of money too. That would be great. Please let me know what you thought of the video down below in the comments. I would love to know if you found this video easy to understand, or if there are any topics that you would like me to go into more detail on, or anything that I even presented poorly that you just didn't get. Please let me know. There are always things that I may forget to mention because I've been doing this for a long time that maybe you needed to know to make all of this work. But for now, I've been Marimage. Happy streaming.